Taking the stage now is Mark Brousseau, Senior Manager, EPCOR Water Control and Automation Engineering. Mark will be presenting Adventures in Establishing an OT Cybersecurity Framework.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome. If you're a part of the session this morning and you heard Mike talk about how he sometimes comes along and taps people on the shoulders, you're an end user, you should present, Well, I'm here because of that. He's done that a couple of times to me, and first time I presented was basically on IT/OT convergence, or he talked about that, adventures in IT/OT convergence. So this is sort of the sequel to that. We started down the IT/OT convergence role, and then we're going to talk today about some of the adventures I've had. So it's a different kind of a presentation. I'm not going to be here telling you all the advantages of doing things a certain way. What I'm going to share with you is what we've been up to and what we've been doing and some of the adventures we've had. And the reason I'm doing it is the first ICS conference I came to basically had the opportunity to talk with some people and actually listen to some sessions. And I took away some things from end users who were saying, this is what we did, Mark, and this is what, if you do this, you might need to do that, and these kind of things, and they were very helpful to me. And so I'm hoping through this, for any end users out here, there might be an opportunity for you to leverage some of our experiences, to avoid some of our experiences maybe, or at the very least, if you're actually going through some of the same things we're doing, at least you'll know there's somebody else in the trenches with you doing the same things and having the same struggles as we go along. So that's what my session looks like this afternoon. Who am I and where am I from? Well, basically in Canada, EPCOR, we're a water and wastewater utility. I have DCS systems and SCADA systems, basically. I have a team of people who are responsible we serve about 1 million people, and basically also some regional sites across Western Canada and actually into Ontario. Regional sites, of course, because of their smaller nature, don't have the cybersecurity resources that they can gain locally, so we support them out of our Edmonton office as well. So that's basically, my background is electrical engineering. I've been through a number of years, spent some time in IT actually, so basically I'm an OT guy, and I don't know how many IT folks we have here. I think it's getting smaller, which is good because, we'll talk about IT later and OT and some of the issues that the two have. But basically, as we go through it, I've spent some time in IT because there was a big consulting group that came, about 20 years ago. I was in an organization and said, there's an IT group, because they didn't know the difference. There's an IT group that Mark's running over here in engineering, and then there's an IT group in basically doing all the business services, and you should combine the two. So I ended up in IT because of that, because of course once you, as an OT practitioner, move over into IT, they let you work there for about a year, and then they discover there's more important business processes that need to be done, and you get pulled into project management doing IT projects, okay? So that was just been my experience in the past and some of the things that happened as the political side of it. So with that, though, I'm also certified in IEC 62443, so I've spent some time doing classes. I only did that recently, and so for an older guy, it was very interesting going in and actually writing exams again. Hadn't done that for a long time, but part of the adventure that we're on. So with that, by the way, I'm going to share with you, of course, all the things that I express this afternoon are going to be opinions that I have. They're not substantiated by any company or organization. So with that, let's talk about the session. We're going to actually, as I say, go on a journey. We're going to talk about some of the different adventures we've been on. I'm going to talk about sort of a cyber involvement we've had in looking at some of the objectives we had. How did we set objectives way back when? Some of the cyber tools, some of the vendors, and I'm not going to mention names, I'm just going to talk about the adventures I've had with them. Supply chain, of course, that's a big one for all of us. Our auditors internally love to come, and we've been spending the last couple of years working on our supply chain issues. MSSPs, where do they fit in for us? Cyber maturity, evaluation of that, risk analysis, remote support, and then at the very end, I'm going to look into the crystal ball, and I'm going to say, it's interesting as I sit and listen to all of these discussions about, how do you justify your cyber program? Well, your production goes down, and it's $1 million an hour. Well, I'm a water company. Okay, my production's not $1 million an hour. So it's a little different world that I live in, and I'm going to talk about, is there a different way to approach this based on some of the issues that we're going to talk about. So let's get started, and let's start with the first one. So where to start? Well, again, this was 15 years ago, way back when. We developed a vision document of what we really wanted to and hope to achieve, and I'll talk with those in a minute. There was just basic 6 elements that we looked at, beyond the standard architecture requirements, doing backups and all these things. 6 elements, and these are the ones that we defined basically. Asset inventory. We need to know what's connected, right? And so this is like 15 years ago, we were saying, what do we do to go out and find what's connected? We had spreadsheets like everyone else did at the time, but there's got to be something better than this. How do we align the assets with CVEs? Basically, we're getting all these reports on what's happening. How do I know if this impacts me or not? How do we do that? System access, who's connected, okay? Again, something that's obviously very important. Monitoring for anomalous traffic or behavior. What's going on that we need to know about? Reporting on cyber status and alerts, things that we're doing. How do we actually take all this data and turn it into something that's actually meaningful for us so we can report on it? And then, of course, last, develop cybersecurity awareness and training. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that one, but it's been interesting because, over the years, we've always in organizations, in plant environments, we always have safety moments, right? I hope everybody here has cyber moments, right? We have cybersecurity awareness moments just like you have a safety moment. So in all of our meetings, we do our safety moment to talk about safety. We do our moment to talk about cyber awareness. It was interesting. ICS basically, ICS CERT used to put out these quarterly bulletins. We used to love to use those because they talked about real incidents. And the incidents actually, when you get your team talking about an incident, this happened in a water plant. This is what actually happened. And this is where we went. Could this happen here, and go through it? And it really helps to build awareness on the team. And I think it's been really great to see those things. Now, unfortunately, can't get those anymore. And this was back in the day when they were available. When I asked some representatives from the organization why, they said, well, everybody went to work for consultants, so we don't have those people anymore. So I thought, it's a little unfortunate. Or I think it's a little more about not wanting to share information. But anyway, that was the story I got told. So things are going along fine. We had our 6 objectives, and then, of course, guess what? The auditors called, okay? And this is just internal corporate auditors, part of the organization. We have internal audit, of course, and I'm sure most of you do. And they came calling, but of course, at the time, and I'm talking, this is like last year, this is like 10 or 12 years ago, basically, they came in and there was no understanding there was a difference between operational technology and basically information technology. This is a big organization from outside that had actually come in and was going to do this audit for corporate, but they had no intention. And of course, they were asking us, what do you do about confidential information? Where's your credit card information? And all these guys, what about passwords? Of course, a big one, right? Okay, so we talked for a while over the thing. We were fortunate to actually be able to, and we've talked a lot about this, the difference between CIA and basically safety and availability. So I won't get into it. But again, we know that's there, and talk to them about it. And then actually had to be really positive comments back about the fact that they were open to actually look and say, okay, Mark, if you won't accept us, what would you do? What should you be audited against? So I said, okay, well, let me develop a standard based on operational technology. ISA 99, of course, which has become, IEC 62443, was just being developed. We looked at it as a standard to reference, but we said, well, it's not done yet. It's a little hard for us to be able to use it. So we we used NIST 882 as our reference and started building sort of our standards. What are we going to be audited against? What's important to us? And so, of course, the two, you have to go side by side. You can't just have the one. You've got to have 53. So, I had printouts of both. We're going through, flipping through here. This one refers to here, and then you go back to here. Talk about what are we going to do? What are the things that we're going to be held accountable to do at the time? And so with that, we ended up, building, and I won't go through all the detail here, but we basically went through an opportunity to build out of the standard, just following along the standards. And as you can see, it's not all the items that are in there. We said, these are the ones that are important to us right now. And auditor, if you think there's one we missed, you can talk to us about it. But right now, you can audit us against these things. These are the things that are important to us. These are the things that we think are important to be able to create a safe environment for us. And along with that, we then created basically a list of documents and said, okay, for each of these elements, here's where you go. So you can, these elements will all be found in our disaster recovery plan, or these will all be in our security policy, or these other ones will all be in basically our standards as an organization, or basically our inventory list, and just a reference to it. So that's what we built for them, and actually I really applaud the fact that they were open to letting us do this, and that we were able to do this, and I think it was a step forward in actually developing the awareness within the organization of how important this is. So along with that, one of the core OT cybersecurity objectives that we have as a group is basically plant operation is not dependent on corporate IT, okay? And that's one of the things that each year we demonstrate it. We have a PM where we basically say we unplug from IT, we call the control room, the plant's still running, can you see everything, all those other things, and just validate it. It's one of the things that basically the board of directors, and that's just always an interesting thing. Back when I started my career in OT, board of directors didn't know my name. okay? I get to visit them at least once a year, and quarterly I get to write reports. And when things like Oldsmore or other things happen, of course, I get a call about what does it mean for us, right? So it's a little different now, but I think, again, this was an important one for us to sort of validate. And the interesting thing is we've learned things, though, of course, by doing this, right? Because you discover very quickly that all of a sudden, operations people don't have access to their standard operating procedures, and there's some other things. So we've learned a lot through the process of doing it. So something as well, but something that we try. And I know it's not possible for everybody. For us, it is, and we like to have it as a leverage, or at least test it to make sure it's there. Another thing, again, talking about IT/OT, integration versus convergence, of course, but what's the oversight for it? How do we get talking? And I talked in my last talk about how we actually invited the IT group down to the wastewater plant. Now, you ask, why didn't I pick the water plant as I went to the wastewater plant? Well, I thought I'd give them much more of a flavor of the kind of world that we're in, and give them an opportunity to experience real world plant operations, right? And so they came down very graciously. We served them a nice lunch, talked to them about some of the risks that we have, and then we went through there. But we did. It's building relationships. And I guess I really appreciate the fact that within the organization, we now have a Cybersecurity Governance Council. And basically, EPCOR also has an electrical division. So basically, electrical representative, senior manager for electrical is there. I represent water, wastewater, and drainage, basically, units. And then basically, the EPCOR also has an operation working in Arizona, where we have water operations there, so the US rep is there as well. So we sit there, and basically, we report to the board audit committee, gives us an opportunity really to talk about the overarching policies. And I appreciate the fact that there's a great place for us to actually talk about saying, all of the policies in IT aren't going to work across the board. So let's talk about how we build a high-level policy that talks about these are the important things we need to do. Then each of us in our own divisions go and say, what does that mean for me? Because it's going to mean something different to electrical group that have NERC SIP responsibilities. It's going to mean something different to water, and it's going to mean something different to USA because they have different regulations. But within that organization, it's worked well. And I just wanted to make sure I give a shout out to the working team that works below us on the Cybersecurity Governance Council, where basically they have all of the work to do associated with actually doing the things that we decide up at this level. What about OT cyber tool experiences? Well, I guess, I don't know how many of you feel this way, but way back when I had a chance, what tool to pick. At my first ICS conference, basically here, I went through and was looking for tools, and my first cyber tools. And like today, there was just too many choices, too much overlap. I came in with my ICS list, like when you go out looking for a control vendor, you want somebody who's been in business for a while, actually, and of course at the time, 2 years in business was the norm, right? You were being supported by products out of Europe or Israel, and basically it was interesting. Local support was for sales only, and basically you really had to look for some technical support, which you discovered was overseas. One of the things we didn't discover till after we brought the product, but that was a challenge that we worked through. And then limited references and installed base. So it was interesting when we bought our first tool, what do you pick? Which one's going to win? You're saying some of these organizations might not survive. How am I going to pick the right one? And so we looked at really, what horse am I going to bet on? And look at it, especially in the OT space, and who's going to be around for a while to support us in going forward. So we tool fit our requirements, okay? Basically, it had all the right things that you'd want to have on a tool like this. What did I do? Help? Did I say something wrong and that's why they cut me off? I don't know. They're working on it. I guess I did. Okay, we're back. Thank you. Let me back up here. Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. We're giving it all away. Anyway, the horse you bet on, we cared about these items, basically proprietary, ICS-specific threat intelligence, all kinds of good things. The fact that it was, it would integrate with our SIM and basically was scalable and all those kind of good things. Basically, Gartner and other groups had lots of good things to say about it. And of course, then there was a takeover of the product, right? So a big software company came and took it over. And guess what? Okay. All of a sudden, support disappeared. We used to be able to actually give, feedback to the actual software company about things we'd like, how we'd like the reports done, all those kind of good things. That, of course, was no longer wanted. Our costs went up. Licensing requirements, licensing requirements for the product became so extreme and so much of a challenge. In fact, almost to us, we felt a cyber risk. So we gave up and trying to say it wasn't worth it. So I guess we bet on a winner, but actually it just wasn't for us. And so we had to look and we shut it down and move on to other products. So some of our experiences in this environment. OT cyber tool experiences around cost escalation, something we hadn't expected. It's interesting, the tool comes in really affordable, right? We could actually put it in, and then in the next years when costs escalated to beyond what we could even afford. So it's something we thought we negotiated up front, and we talked about, when you look at increases in prices and you look at what you're going to talk down the road, what's going to look like. But again, as the organizations change, these impacts change. And again, a water company, I tease my electrical friends because they have deeper pockets. Their team's twice as big as mine, and they have a lot bigger funds to actually draw from. So I said, the cyber tool experience people, or the cyber tool people out there, got to quit working for the electricity side, right? So, OT cyber tool experiences, when it comes to asset and monitoring tools, we found that these are good on one side, but not on both. And when I talk about IT here, I'm not talking about IT corporate, I'm talking about our servers and our systems there. We've put tools in, and pulling data for the control systems environment into the SIM. We get one product that works really good for our PLCs and pulling information out of the other things, but when it comes to actually servers and pulling that stuff, it just doesn't work as well. And when you try to get the two tools talking together, well, if I had my cybersecurity manager here to talk to you about it, he could share some of his gray hairs that he's had. He actually still has hair, which is a good thing, I guess. We haven't had to pull that out yet, but anyway. And then I guess when it comes to, and I apologize to anybody here, I called it IT arrogance, but maybe we should talk a little bit about lack of OT knowledge. And I guess I've been in some conferences. I was at a CS4CA conference, and it was interesting. One of the vendors or one of the presenters was talking and basically talking to us, and it was like a 90% OT crowd. And the way he was talking about it is like basically, we've got it all in IT. You guys just have to accept it and put it in, and it's going to work for you. And then he started making some examples of things that he was doing. And then, so I stood up. Nobody said anything at the end of the session. I stood up and talked a little bit and said, interesting, we appreciate it. There's some good tools, lots of things we can learn from you guys. But, talked about some basic things that he'd done. I'd never had actually an audience clap for me in making a comment back to a speaker before. But it was, again, just one of those things as we look through this. How do we get through this and look at having experiences together that we can work on, learn from each other, okay? And then, of course, supply chain risk. We have basically looked at, S-bombs, okay, and some vendors out there. It was interesting. When I talk to vendors, I'd love it if you guys would do this, right? You'd actually look at, when you're giving me software, do you know where your software is coming from? And I guess as an end user, I'd rather not be the one to have to do this. And I guess I'm looking at it from a perspective of, in the future, I don't know where this is going, but I'm thinking it would really be nice to know that people know what's being shipped to us. Maybe some overarching policy, OT-specific priorities by area is another thing we've done in the supply chain risk. We've reviewed and assessed our critical vendors, which was an interesting experience. A little hard for, this little water company in Canada, talk to Microsoft, what are you doing on your screen? But filling out that sort of background information, which is part of what the auditors and people are looking for from us. We've done a focus of contractors working on site, again, working with them and investigating cyber certification by companies that certify safety levels for contractors. And it's been an interesting one to say that, there are companies out there, they certify our safety workers, but now they're also certifying cybersecurity. So I know there's some organizations we've been working with to look at saying, here are the people who work on site, could you certify their cybersecurity? And that's been an interesting step forward in the areas we've had. So looking at managing a security service provider, something I never thought I'd do, okay? I'll be honest, I thought we're going to build our own team, I'll have my own people, we're going to train our people. I've got some great people, they're IT backgrounds, but OT grown up, so they started as control engineers, or they started in the engineering world, or started into IT and spent a lot of time doing PLC programming or those kind of things. So great people, but as you start to pull information out of your system, all of a sudden you discover this is a lot bigger than we thought it was going to be, okay? And it's really hard to set up the rules and all the other things that were required to actually change this data into information we can actually action and be clear on what it looks like. And so with that, we basically looked at interfacing with a group and also providing the 7x24. My cybersecurity manager doesn't mind being on call for important things, but being on call 7x24, 365, a little bit extreme for him. And again, so we really have worked well. It's worked well in providing them the information. They do sort of that reporting and data analysis for us. That's sort of one support, and then they actually push back to us any actionable items. And so this kind of arrangement has worked really well, but there's actually so much data coming out of our system. It's one of the challenges that we have in looking at saying, why are we pulling so much data? What are the challenges there? And as you talk to vendors, that's one of the things we're working on right now as an organization, to say, what are we doing that could be done differently? Evaluation of cybersecurity maturity. Well, that's an interesting one. I don't know how many of you out there have gone through the processes. C2M2 was talked about in the last presentation, but it's interesting. You know, we've used a bunch of different items, audits against the standard, as I talked about, internal and external, you know, audits against some real world scenarios. We've done some of those. We've looked at basic live fire tests of our SIM, which was very helpful. Insurance evaluation questions, of course, when it comes to cybersecurity, if you want to look for a really inappropriate survey, we've seen a couple of those coming from insurance companies, right? Where it's basically, you know, it's an IT questionnaire again, right? And they're talking to you, and they don't take into consideration the fact that OT for us is buried underneath IT. So they're asking you questions about things where, you know, and you can't respond, well, that's something IT does for us, right? And so it's just very interesting to look at sort of some of the key items that even got missed on some of these surveys. Things you say, you know, if this is really a cybersecurity assessment of us as an OT group, and basically you're looking to determine whether you're going to insure us as an organization on this, you're really not asking some of the right questions for OT at all. And so we've really seen very much of an IT focus in these kind of insurance evaluations. And then basically C2M2. Very difficult. I don't know if you've experienced to have consistent responses. We've used it a couple times in evaluating our mill level and looking at, we actually built a reference document to say, okay, if you're going to answer this question, what this means for us is this. And that's the only way across the different groups that I support, whether it's drainage or water, wastewater, or even electricity. We needed some sort of reference because each of these questions can really be interpreted in different ways. So to really evaluate your maturity at certain things. So again, looking at if other people have ideas around what is a good way to evaluate your maturity, would love to hear it. And then, so we're looking for that better way. So again, if you're familiar with it, you get an evaluation in these areas that talks about it. And again, like I say, our reference standards are all built against 882, and we're using NIST. But basically, this is another framework. And again, that's an area that makes it a bit of a challenge when we look at where do we go here in regard to next steps and planning our strategy for the future. But one of the big parts of that, basically, of course, is, and we've heard several times, is, you know, risk assessment. And what do you do about risk assessment? And this is one where it was really interesting because we had the process safety engineers. I mean, process safety engineers in the plant have a well-defined process to evaluate safety concerns, right? And so we talked with them and said, you know, if you're doing these HAZOPs for us as an organization on the safety side, can we actually expand the process to look beyond just basically the safety side, but actually implement a look at what happens if related to cybersecurity incidents or breaches. And so we did that, and it actually was very successful. It helped us to really look at what does the risk look like and basically validate sort of some consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering initiatives. And using a term that we're just only learning in the last few years or so, but it really is helpful to look at some of those things and say, when it comes to what we're doing, is there a way to actually implement something that would be engineered in and get rid of the problem that you have on a cyber side? And it is possible. So, vendors, I guess vendor remote support. We've heard a lot about different things here, and I guess this is my plea to vendors, to please define a support package when you're doing a remote activity and things. I mean, I've had remote services, and so establishing different organizational relationships with different organizations who are doing remote support. So for example, we have solar farm, the large solar farm that's installed, being supported by the vendor. And when you start asking questions like, who's going to be doing backups on the phone? You guys are supposed to be doing complete support. What's your support package look like? Well, I didn't get answers to any of the typical questions: malware protection, VPN, secure logins, 2FA, any of those things. Didn't get any answers to those kinds of things. So it was a real surprise for me, because large organization, you'd think these things would all be sort of locked down, but I got the sense that not everybody out there was asking these questions of them. And I hope that I'm sure that's going to change, and maybe it was just who we were dealing with, but it was a surprise to me. And so basically that part, as well as looking at it, developing it all for a reasonable cost. So those are some of the adventures we've been on, some of the things we've been doing, and then I guess, I wanted to spend the last few minutes here just talking with you sort of about what comes next for water cybersecurity. And it doesn't just apply to water. I think it applies to any of those organizations that maybe aren't under regulations right now. It's interesting, water, of course, in Canada is not considered a critical infrastructure, okay? At least in the US it is considered critical. I think that in the future in Canada they might change that, but right now it's not, which is a bit of an issue. And so where's it going to go? And I think, what comes next for water? Is it going to be more regulations and checkboxes? It was interesting as I talked at the CS4CA conference with others who were under regulations, and whether it's pipeline or electricity groups. And it was interesting, when you talk about what are you really doing to make sure that your system is mature, how are you evaluating those kind of things? They really couldn't get away from the checkboxes. They had all these things that they were going to get fined for, or they had to make sure they did, or things that had happened against them. And it was really sort of a very interesting discussion to say, all these regulations have really put such a focus on checking the boxes, as opposed to saying, is our infrastructure really safe? Is it really got the checks and balances we really need? And it's one of those things, and I'm not against regulations. I think regulations are helpful. They might allow for us to provide some more resources, but within reason and applicably applied. So I guess I look at it from the perspective of, how about incentives that create a solution for water and other critical non-electrical infrastructure rather than just regulations? And, there's a difference in water and other industries. Like in the electrical industry, I understand it's connected together. There's a grid, there's an impact, there's some definition there. But my water plant isn't connected to the water plant in the city south of us and the ones west of us. And so there's some differences in how we need to regulate things. We can't just take something. But is it possible for us to actually look for a solution that would be possible? And so I guess, this is my dream vision as I look into my crystal ball. Could government, water industries, and cybersecurity vendors work together to build a solution? Is that possible? Could we look at building a solution instead of just putting regulations and then expecting all these people who don't do this today to actually try to do something they've never ever done, right, on their own? And that's a bit of it. So could the government provide incentives instead of regulations? Could there be support and acceptance of the need by the water industry? And I'm the first to admit, at the conference I mentioned, I was the only water guy in Canada at the conference, right? And it's one of those things that it still needs some support and development and some people to understand the issues. But then also a recognition by vendors that they need to drink water too, perhaps, and that maybe reasonable and consistent pricing on some of these tools, especially for critical infrastructure, would be really helpful in actually making sure we could move forward. So what could a water cybersecurity co-op look like, okay, or say non-electrical cybersecurity co-op? It could be an MSP type of organization that monitors water, critical infrastructure, production facilities, right? That would be the role. Provides a service and a buffer between cyber tool vendors and the water producers, because your average water producer out there isn't going to have a depth of experience. And like I said, with the regional support activities that we provide, where we have smaller municipalities that we operate their water plants for, they don't have the resources to be able to understand about cybersecurity. And when we talk to them, they appreciate what we're doing for them, but they don't have an understanding of what it really means, right? It could be maybe a nonprofit organization. Maybe it aligns with some colleges to help train some other OT cyber specialists, right? Bringing engineering co-op students into our team is always something we've enjoyed doing, because we love to give them a taste of what it's like to be in an OT environment, and then hope that they go out and continue on in that career as we look at training more and more people who understand OT cybersecurity. How would it work? Well, water utility could express an interest to join a co-op. The Water Security Co-op then could conduct a review of the facility, a list of recommendations and steps they could follow, for a reasonable rate, training and support provided to install the systems and communication, there'd be that step, and then cybersecurity monitoring could begin at a reasonable monthly or yearly fee. And so with that, I sort of thought, well, I'm going to go out and talk to some people about it. I'm going to talk to a consultant. This consultant worked with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, completing an audit on sort of water production facilities in Canada, and so they'd done a deep dive with us about where we were, and we had talked with them about it. And I proposed the idea to other consultants. But you know what I was told? Well, basically, the water industry couldn't afford their consulting fees, right? And so I said, that's really unfortunate, because I really think that this is something that's important to get done, okay? So I guess I'm throwing it out here today, standing on my soapbox for a minute, saying, anyone out there interested in building a legacy and being part of establishing a water cybersecurity co-op that protects our water production for a reasonable cost, without bureaucracy and check boxes. And based on that, I think it's important that we support building a solution, not more regulations, if where they're necessary, but not a bunch of regulations that the water industry is going to have to follow. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. And I'm going to move out of the sun here. Sorry.
Early on, you talked about making your choices of controls through NIST 882 to 53. In my experience, the beginning of that is to go through a risk assessment to help you, because 82 streamlines 53 to one degree,
right.
But the selection of your level of risk
right.
Helps you to further reduce those number of controls to start with. Did you go through a risk assessment to begin with?
Very basic one, and the reason for that was the pressure that we were under because we were being audited, right? And so we went through and did a very basic one, but we looked at it from a perspective, as I said, we didn't go through and pull everything out of 82, or we said, here are the ones that, yes, you can hold us accountable to, and if you want to add some, we're open to that as well. But these are the ones that we're living to right now and go from there. And they were accepting of what we had, okay, and from that perspective. But it was a lower level. We weren't trying to target, within that standard, you're right, there's like 3 or 4 levels, okay? We tried to target the ones, but we went looking for terminology that basically was representative of the fact, this is not Mark's idea of what he should be doing. This is something that is actually referenced in some documents, and that was what the auditors were looking for, and that's what they were accepting of.
It's interesting to put some pressure on the auditors to know more about 53 to be able to say to you, we found this control you should add.
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting. I think first time up, it was one of those things where I think they were happy to see that there was a reference that we were referencing and something we were using, right? So, thank you. Okay, so I'm hoping that if it sparked some interest in some of the areas we talked about, if you have interest in some of these areas, or you have some opportunities to share with me after the session, I'll be around. So certainly would look forward to discussing things with you further. So, oh, sorry, yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, thank you very much for your time.